it's a joy that we can share the knowledge about the Ramayana and the true meaning of what the Ramayana is as unfolded by Maharshi and explained to us. Many might be connected that have very profound knowledge about the Ramayana, and others might know less about it. So I will try to cover knowledge that will make everyone comfortable in understanding the importance of this part of the Vedic literature. First, to situate it, Ramayana is part of the Veda. It's part of one aspect of the Veda called the Itihas, and it is, as Maharshi alluded to, it is the display of how natural law functions. It's a story, and Maharshi also said, it's not about a story, it's not about somebody doing something, yet of course it is itself seen as a story because there is development, there are events that are happening, that have happened historically, or in what way they represent something that is historical, in other ways metaphorical, in other ways as a poem, in other ways as a philosophy. And this is the way this story has been looked at throughout the ages by many commentators and interpreters. But at the depths of it, it is about an aspect of the laws of nature that represents wholeness, and that is in the Ramayana called Ram. Ram is described as a person, as an individual, as a king in the story. And the Ramayana is the story of that king. And that is on the surface level of what it is. And we will be looking at its real meaning, its depths, and what is its significance from really a scientific level, as guided and brought to light by Maharshi and the research that has been done under his guidance to reveal the value of what the Ramayana truly is. So it's a fascinating aspect of knowledge in which total natural law is actually being explained through a story form. And this is the value of the Ramayana as an important part of the Veda. Again, what is Veda for those who are not familiar? Veda is knowledge, it's total knowledge. And Veda is made out of many aspects. And it is revered, and particularly in the ancient Eastern tradition, and particularly in India, as representing some very profound knowledge from which actually many belief systems have emerged. Many refer to it in so many different ways. Again, some see it as a religious text, others see it as a philosophy, some see it as poetry or teaching of life, rules of conduct, health values, and many aspects. It is through the grace of Maharishi Mahesh Yogi that we really are able to understand the full value of Veda in a scientific way, in a scientific perspective. And that has very profound significance for life, not only in terms of theoretical knowledge and understanding, but also in terms of its practical application to create a better life and guide us towards higher achievement, fulfillment, and peace on earth. What is the knowledge that Veda is talking about? It's the knowledge of the laws of nature. When we say laws of nature, we think, what is nature? Is it like the jungle or the trees and the environment, which some people maybe imagine that's what we say when we're talking about nature? It's actually the nature of life, the nature of living, the nature of being, the nature of evolution, the nature of existence. So it is really total knowledge of how life comes about, why it comes about, how it expresses itself, and the mechanics by which these expressions evolve and go into different experiences, different realities, different aspects of creation and being for the human beings as well as for all aspects of life, physical, spiritual, mental, psychological, and all aspects of environment and the relationship between environment and the individual, about past, present, and future, about decision making, about the results of action, about how nature, how life manages our activity and guides us towards more achievements, towards greater growth and development, what are the results of our actions and how they lead to growth or to happiness and fulfillment, or to also pain and suffering in case one is acting not in accordance with the laws of nature. So it is really total knowledge. It is also the knowledge that scientists are looking to discover. What is the nature of reality? What are we made of? Where do we come from? What is time? What is space? But this knowledge is not just given in terms of modern scientific formulae, for example, of equations and forces and all of that. It is given in different ways. It is given with the purpose of actually developing the full potential of every individual and to teach how to create balance in society. So it is knowledge that has, of course, theoretical component, but it is mostly a practical aspect of knowledge that actually tells us what to do, how to do things in different ways. Different ways means there are different categories of ways in which this knowledge is expressed. It can be expressed directly through guidelines of health, such as in Ayurveda. It can be guidelines of how to build our houses, such as in Sthapatya Veda, how to construct our villages and cities. It is also guidelines about behavior, about nature and the relation of the individual to nature, about music, about sound, and about all aspects of life. Now, Veda, therefore, brings to us this knowledge from different perspectives. One profound aspect of these perspectives is on the level of sound itself, on the level of vibrations of sound. So the laws of nature that are available in the field of existence in life, that manage life, that manage existence, manage behavior, manage relationships, etc., they come from a field, a unified field of pure existence, which is the field of pure consciousness. And then they manifest as reverberations of that field that interact with each other and lead to the surface value of apparent surface existence on the gross level of reality. So the gross level of what we experience comes from a subtle level of pure being, pure consciousness, that manifests into reverberations, and these reverberations, fluctuations, collect together, interact together, and ultimately appear as surface values, which are the expressions on the material level, on the physical level, and on the physiological level. So from the Vedic perspective, all that is experienced as physical, as gross, comes from non-physical consciousness that manifests itself through its fluctuations as various physical components that collapse into molecules and then gross levels of cells and tissues and then physical body and the whole universe. So that is a very important basic value of understanding what Veda is, because it's a platform from which we can really understand, based on Maharshi's teaching and on the research that was done, what true Veda is, what the full value of Veda is. Now, therefore, there is a field of pure being which we experience when we transcend in transcendental meditation. And from that experience of transcendent, which is beyond any reverberation, beyond any change, there is the dynamics of transformation that lead to manifestation. These dynamics are reverberations. When the mind is settled and clear and transcends and is established in pure being, in pure consciousness, if the physiology is refined enough, is clear enough, and the environment is clear enough, it is possible to perceive how this one silent field actually manifests as dynamic reverberations. And it manifests as dynamic reverberation in a very orderly way. There is an orderly structure that comes from this one field that allows this to happen. And what manages this order are what we call the laws of nature. So the laws of nature are themselves the dynamics of what becomes manifestation. Through full understanding of natural law, through full understanding of the reality of what manages the universe, is based on direct experience of those dynamics of natural law. There is, of course, an intellectual understanding that is an analytical understanding that can happen, that one can analyze, but the final actual total direct understanding and comprehension and ability to feel what natural law is and own natural law is to be able to directly experience it and experience its manifestation and the mechanics of its manifestation. So we say, of course, knowledge has different values. You can know things intellectually by analyzing them and dissecting them and seeing what is right, what is wrong, how does it work, how the forces of nature work and function. This is an intellectual understanding and an intellectual way of acquiring knowledge. There is, of course, another way of acquiring knowledge is through direct experience. Now, we do have direct experience through our senses. When we see objects, we see things, we feel things. So through the sense of hearing, we hear sound. Through the sense of sight, we see things. We say flowers are like this. We say music is like that. Through touch, we can touch things. And that is really direct experience, which is different than intellectual understanding. But this direct experience through the senses is limited to what the senses can actually experience. So the senses have a limited range of experience, and they allow us to have a direct knowledge of what is there. So knowledge is also coming to us through the sensory experience. And then we can analyze it and have an intellectual understanding, which can be even more profound than what the senses give us as experience. Because if you see the sun moving from the east to the west every day in the morning and then in the evening goes to the west, you can say, well, the sun moves in the sky from the east, goes all the way up in the sky and then down to the other side in the west. And then you assume that the sun is moving. But the intellectual understanding of how nature is working allows you to see that the earth is rotating around its axis, and that's what gives the impression of the sun moving in the sky. So that is a deeper understanding. There is even deeper understanding than that, and that is direct experience, but on the transcendental level, on the level that uses not just the surface value of the senses, but the total structure of the nervous system and its full ability to cognize things even deeper than on the surface level of the intellect. So we can say it's a deeper level of intellectual understanding where the intellect actually merges with the transcendent. So you transcend, you go beyond the surface level of trying to analyze things and trying to see things, and the intellect becomes so sharp that it can see things on the transcendental level, on the field of pure being, on the field of pure existence. And there you can actually see and experience the reverberations of natural law as they manifest from those values that are deeper, subtler, and ultimately subtlest in the silent state of pure existence. So that is like direct experience. I use this analogy or this explanation to say that the cognition of the Veda is a direct experience, similar but of course much more profound than the experience that we have through the senses. It's similar because it does not require intellectual analysis. It's a direct experience of the actual reverberations of the laws of nature. And that is the most profound knowledge that one can get, not only about the transcendent as a silent value, but also the transcendent as a dynamic value that reverberates and manifests into the reality of the universe. For this to happen, one has to have a special physiology, special conditions, and be very deeply in the transcendent, established in the transcendent. And there are people who have had that and have experienced that, and at a time that was special, and they have a name. The name is Rishi. It's a Sanskrit name to mean seer, the seers of the reverberations of natural law. So the seer of the reverberation of natural law is the Rishi, and it's called a seer because it's a direct experience, like the experience on the senses, but a much more profound, of course, than the superficial sensory experience. It's an inner direct cognition of the reverberations of natural law as they manifest into dynamism and then become the universe. So this direct experience, how did the rishis reveal it to us? They revealed it to us in terms of sound, by chanting whatever they have felt as reverberation. They kind of translated it, not in terms of language translation, but in terms of reverberation as sound value. And these are the sounds of the Veda. The Veda, the basic Veda, there are 4 aspects, mainly Rig Veda as the holistic Veda, and then Sama Veda, Yajur Veda, and Atharva Veda. They are also a holistic value, but from different perspectives. There is the perspective of the seer that we just described, the Rishi value, and there is this perspective of the dynamism that connects the seer to what the seer sees, the actual aspect that manifests. And that connection, that connecting and processing and linking value that allows the seer to see the dynamism, the impulses of natural law themselves and how they actually interact and manifest, is called Devata. So Devata value is the value that allows the seer, that is within the seer, of course, already, because the seer is the transcendental value of pure consciousness. But there is that aspect of natural law that is the dynamism, the impulses of the dynamism coming out of this silent witness, the seer, and the dynamic value that is the reality of what we call Devata value. And then this is perceived as object, if you like, as an object of perception. So the seer, through the Devata, sees the sounds and expresses them with a certain rhythm, and that rhythm and that sound is the Chandas value, the object of their perception. So when we hear the Vedic sounds, the Rig Veda, for example, in each aspect of the Rig Veda, there is a Rishi value. It describes the quality of the seer. There is a Devata value. It requires the nature of the link, of the processing, of the expressing value, of the managing value. And there is the Chandas value, which is the value of what is actually happening, what is the seer expressing, in what way, in what rhythm, in what formula, what is the object of the expression. So put together, the Rishi, Devata, and Chandas give us the togetherness of that, wholeness, which is the totality of natural law as one unified value. And in the Veda, this is called Samhita. Samhita is the togetherness of Rishi, Devata, and Chandas. And the Samhita, therefore, of this, that wholeness, that totality, is expressed in terms of sound. And these are the sounds of the Veda. Rig Veda, the main Veda, is the Samhita, the totality of all different aspects of the Veda. Sama Veda is all aspects of the Veda with a Rishi flavor. Yajur Veda is another aspect of wholeness, totality, with a Devata predominance. And then you have the Atharva Veda, the reverberating value of natural law, that is also wholeness and totality, but predominantly with a value of Chandas, which means the reverberating, the actual effect, the actual sound reverberation value of the Veda. So these are now 4 Vedas that we have described. And how is this knowledge? Again, it is knowledge through direct experience of the rishis, experiencing with the instrumentality of the devata, the actual reality of how manifestation happens and how it becomes outer value from the inner silent value. So this is knowledge directly through sound. And to really know it well, one has to transcend. And being in the transcendent and hearing even those sounds, even if one does not oneself necessarily cognize those sounds, one is getting established in true knowledge of reality. One's human nervous system is dynamically structured and enhanced. The structure is corrected, adjusted, so that it is in tune with natural law, in tune with total nature. And then the knowledge that one gains is a spontaneous knowledge for action in accordance with natural law. So in this case, the intellect might not be able to tell you what is the law of physics that manages the forces and the movement of things, what is the law of chemistry that allows this and that, because these are specific knowledge and isolated aspects of knowledge. But if one is established in pure consciousness, and one's nervous system, therefore, is attuned with natural law, then one spontaneously can think and act according to the laws of nature, because one has totally attuned with those laws of nature. So what is important is to transcend, and then one can hear the sounds of the Veda and be in tune with them, and that enhances the process of getting in tune with total natural law. And therefore, one can feel, I know nothing, I am just simple, pure being, I am pure consciousness. Yet, when there is a requirement for decision making, requirement for action, requirement for management, requirement for planning for the future, it naturally comes in tune with the evolutionary force of natural law. Now, this is possible to happen for us human beings because our physiology has been structured in the same way as these reverberations of natural law are structured. We have in our physical body, in our machinery of perception, of intellect, of feeling, of experience, in our physical nervous system and physiology, they are structured in accordance with the laws of nature, and all these laws of nature are present within us. That is why the Veda says, Vedoham, which means it says to everyone, you are the Veda, I am the Veda, Vedoham, Tattvamasi, thou art that. Sarvam Kalvidam Brahm, everything is totality, everything is wholeness. Aham Brahmasmi, I am wholeness, I am totality. These are there because we have in the build-up of our structure all the requirement, we have all the Veda available already within us. And that is what the research of Veda in human physiology has shown. Under Maharshi's guidance, I was blessed to work with him on that and reveal that actually the human physiology is aligned to the Veda, is actually built according to Veda. Our nervous system, our physiology is structured on the basis of a blueprint of an architectural design, which is the expressions of these sounds, these reverberations of the Veda. And it was Maharishi who discovered that reality, who actually formulated the structure of Veda and how it is. And his main, if you like, axiom or theorem was, if Veda is truly total natural law, then it has to have a perfect structure that unfolds in a perfect way. And he took Rig Veda, the first holistic Samhita, which means togetherness of all the Vedas, and looked at its structure, means how the syllables are, how the words are, how many silence and dynamism there are in it, when there are pauses, when there are movements, how many paragraphs, how many syllables. And he has shown how the Veda is actually perfectly orderly. And this was what led to his, what he called the Apaurushaya Bhashya, which means the uncreated commentary that is explaining how the Veda actually comments on itself, and we don't need to comment on it, and therefore has shown that the value of the Veda is in its sound, in its reverberation, in its dynamic that is available to us as sound. So there is no point to try to comment on it and say this means this, not even to translate it, because it's not at the level of the translation that its function is most profound, but at the level of the reverberation of its sound, and then to discover that this structure of the Veda is the same as the structure of our human physiology. So we talked about 4 Vedas, and it's important that we highlight this value, because when we come to the Ramayana, we want to understand how does it relate to the Veda? How is it part of the Veda? On the most profound abstract level, but very, very concrete results and effectiveness, the Veda is therefore on the level of pure sound, pure sound. But then as the Veda comments on itself, there are different aspects of the Veda. For example, if you say, but Ayurveda, what is Ayurveda? Ayurveda is a science of life and living, a science of longevity, a science of the span of life, how to eat, how to do this and that. What is Jyotish? It's the science of how to act in accordance with natural law, according with the rhythms of nature, the changes in different times and different days and different seasons, what happens, and how to understand and plan accordingly, and what things we can do to use what sounds of the Veda in order to adjust things if they came out of balance. So these are actual specific ways that natural law is being presented that also have a structure, and their structure is significant, but they also have a teaching aspect through different directions, indications, and values that are being expressed. In the same way as in maybe modern science, we have different topics, the topic of psychology, of biology, the study of physics from this particular perspective of the forces, study of physics from the perspective of theoretical physics and quantum mechanics, and like that, material science, engineering, and all of this. Veda also has these specific values of teaching about how nature works, and again, it teaches through this actual structure of it, through the sound, but also through some specific values that can be also taught. So these different specialties of the Veda, they include, for example, how nature expresses itself, how nature transforms things from one thing to another, how this transformation leads to an expansion, a growth, development. But this growth taking us outwards, how is it maintaining its connectedness to the inner value, to the silent value, so that it doesn't get lost into all kind of possible chaos. So there is a self-referral value. When the expansion happens, there is a return value that is called nirukt. So the expression is shiksha, the transformation kalpa, the expansion vyakaran, the self-referral coming back, that is nirukt. And like that, we have different aspects, different topics in the Veda, different ways of different structures of the Veda. Unfortunately, throughout time, this understanding has been lost. And you can even find places, even in India and other places, where people attach themselves to one of those aspects of the Veda. So you have people, let's say, I belong to the Vyakaran group, and therefore Vyakaran is expansion, but Nirukt is going back, so there is a contradiction maybe. And then you get into these sometimes misunderstandings that the Veda has contradictory values in it. But life is full of things that can look to be opposite to each other, but these opposite values are there actually to help each other. You know, we can take the example of a tree or a flower that is growing from a seed. And if you have too much sun, it will burn it. If you have too much dryness, it will dry it. If you have too much water, it will wet it too much, and then it will, not flourish because it's not able to maintain itself. It becomes too wet, and it doesn't help. So you have to have a balance. So even though these values seem contradictory, one is drying, one is burning, one is wetting, but the balance between them is what allows nature to grow in a perfect way. And that balance we need in every aspect, at every point in our development, in our progress, in our evolution. And that is why these values, they come together as a perfect science, actually, of life and living. And it was Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, who actually revealed this value, that all of these values of the Veda, and he divided them into 40 aspects, that some of them can look different than the other and contradictory, but he organized them as a perfect science of life and showed them to be actually supporting each other, and showed their meaning in their function and in their structure and how they can be used. So we have 40 aspects. We discussed only a few today. But for example, yoga, which is very familiar with many people are interested in self-development. Yoga is one aspect of the unifying value of natural law, which is one aspect of the Veda. Now, all of these aspects, all of these 40 aspects, are actually present in our own human physiology. Yoga is there in the brain, Nyaya is there in the thalamus, and if you look at their divisions and subdivisions, you find that they are actually exactly like the divisions and subdivisions of those particular aspects that perform those particular functions in our nervous system, as well as those particular functions and structures that are part of the Veda. So we are truly a replica of the Veda in terms of structure and in terms of function. So here is the Veda, and that was the first aspect of the discovery and Veda in human physiology. It shows how the different parts of our body are actually constructed completely in terms of Veda, and how actually those Vedic sounds can be used to heal, to create balance and to restructure the physiology. And it also explains why Veda says that everyone is wholeness, everyone is totality. It also explains how and why a human being can actually experience the absolute, experience the transcendent. It's because our machinery, our physical machinery, is able to do it. And why it can do it? Because it is structured like that. It has all of these values in it. So when your nervous system is transcending and merges with the absolute pure being, it doesn't find a contradiction because it is itself in its dynamic structure, physical dynamism of its structure, it is the same as the dynamism that is within the silent value of the absolute, and which we call Veda, which we call natural law, which Maharishi calls the constitution of the universe. Constitution of the universe means that which is the basis on which everything has been constructed, or everything is being conducted. This is the architectural design of all of reality, and all of this is within us. So when you dive into the transcendent, there is a sense of harmony and coherence, because you are that, you are already that, you have that. That explains why throughout the ages and different traditions, it has been said that humans were created in the image of the divine, in the image of God, means in the image of wholeness, in the image of totality. So we do have within us total reality of natural law. Total reality of the Veda is present within us. Now we come to the Ramayana. The Ramayana is part of the Itihas, and the other part is called the Mahabharata. The Ramayana, how does it give us natural law? Because it is Veda. And since it is Veda, it is total natural law. As we said, we can have total natural law from different perspectives. We can have it basically only as sound, and that is very profound, of course, the sound value. We can have it as instructions, we can have it as different specialties, as different feelings relating to the environment, relating to the cosmos, to the cycles of nature, even music and sound, and all of these different values of the Veda. And how is the Ramayana also total knowledge? What is its specialty? It is very interesting that one of the ways that Veda is being expressed in its value, in its full value, is through a story. The story of Ram, the story of the Ramayana. So natural law manifests itself and expands, and it reaches all kinds of infinite field of possibilities in its expressions, such as a human being, a society, and therefore in relationships, in management, in leadership, and support from nature, from the different cycles of nature. There are these very important relationships that happen when complexity arises through manifestation. So as complexity arises through manifestation, how does natural law manage that complexity? And how can we understand that and have teaching from it and a feeling about it and see how does it work? So the Ramayana gives us that knowledge in the form of a story. The story of Ram, and we'll go through the story a little bit, so those who don't know, they are reminded of the main aspects of the story. And then we can start looking at what does it mean that Ramayana is in our human physiology. Because since Ramayana is also Veda, and we are also Veda. Therefore, also Ramayana is in our physiology. But Ramayana is a story. Something happens that are events. It's not just functions of specific values. For example, the yoga is a unifying value, and it performs its function because there are these association fibers that connect right and left, front and back in the brain, and they are connected to the 4 lobes of the brain. And there are these sutras, these specific values. It's like a computer, and the computer has many functions and many chips in it, and it performs its function of unifying value. If you take Nyaya, it performs its function of deciding, distinguishing, how you distinguish between one thing and the other, and you decide about it, which part of the brain takes care of that. There is a part, a module, it's sitting there, it performs that action. So these are these different components that are the different aspects of the Veda that actually are there in our own human physiology and perform their different functions. But then, how do they evolve? How do they progress? How do they deal with each other? How do they function? What is the ultimate possibility in their functioning, not only individually, but as a group? And who is the orchestra master, the orchestra leader, who guides this whole structure and makes it work as a coherent value? Because you have different aspects. You have the heart that does something, the liver does something else, the brain is doing some sensory values, but also some motor values to move the body. You have values for breathing, for maintaining blood pressure, maintaining heart rate. These are different aspects that are inside our nervous system. And you can imagine what kind of chaos it would be if all of these values start working each on its own, independent from the other in a discoordinated way. It can be a catastrophe. And therefore, they have to be conducted and coordinated and work in a perfect way, enter a certain rhythm, a certain attunement, not only with one with another, but also with the environment, with the time of the day, with the season, and all of that. So there has to be a unifying value that connects all of these aspects. And this unifying value actually develops and grows. When we are born with certain abilities, but our nervous system grows and develops. And then as we develop and gain maturity, we continue to develop in our states of consciousness. We pass from waking, sleeping, dreaming. We learn transcendental meditation. We transcend. We experience the transcendent. And then as we progress, and we find that if there is any dysfunction or some impurities in the nervous system, which we call stress, then transcendental meditation helps us to remove this stress, and therefore we get more and more attuned with natural law, because now we can dive deeper, because our system is purified, and when it's purified, it means it goes back to its essential nature, which is Veda, which is the reverberation of Veda, and then it can really transcend, because when it can really transcend fully, it means its dynamism, which means its physical structure and the way everything is connected with everything else, is actually in tune with the dynamism of natural law, and that's why we can stay longer there, and we can stay much, much longer, and when we can stay longer all the time, then the transcendent never is lost, and that we come to a new state of consciousness, which we call cosmic consciousness. And then this develops our perception, our ability to see things more clearly and understand the laws of nature more deeply, because we are there, we are familiar with them, they are awakening within us. And when we understand the full laws of nature and how they function within us, now we can understand how they function outside of us also in nature, and that is when we have this full understanding and relationship, we call this glorified cosmic consciousness or God consciousness. And ultimately, when we realize that I am everything and everything is myself, that ultimately we have understood truly total knowledge, and that full, total, complete knowledge is Brahmi Chetana, which means unity consciousness, the understanding of the value of the oneness of life being everywhere the same. So there is a process of transformation, a process of growth, where at the beginning different parts might be acting, in ways they are learning their relationships and how they work. And then gradually they get coordinated, they get fully aligned, and then we have a fully enlightened human being. This process on the individual level of going from one situation to a full situation of total development and enlightenment is also part of the development of the reality of Veda within our physiological situation, within our physiological life, within our body and mind and feelings. And this is actually what the Ramayana is about. The Ramayana is about the story of the Veda, the story of the different aspects of our physiology and how they interrelate to each other and how they lead through steps of development to greater and greater coherence and greater unity, ultimately to the state of unity consciousness. That is the true meaning of the Ramayana. Now, let's go to the story of the Ramayana a little bit so that we know what we're going to be discussing. And first, we'll just talk a little bit about what the Ramayana is about, what is the story if you read it. And when you read it, you get like an epic. It's like a story of a king that goes here, goes there, does this, does that. And in it there are some amazing, fantastic kind of characters. Some of them really great, some of them divine, some of them less divine and more troublemakers. Some of them are appearing bizarre with different heads. Some of them are half monkey, half man. Some of them, they have realities where they turn into a stone and then they come back. And they do all kinds of unbelievable things in terms of today's, understanding of what is real and what is not real. And these unusual aspects actually have led to complications when we, don't look at the Ramayana from its fullest true value. These complications are basically that even many Indians who come from Hindu tradition, because the Ramayana is there in the Veda, and Ram, who is the hero, the main hero of the Ramayana, is revered as an incarnation of totality, an incarnation of wholeness, an incarnation of Vishnu, which is the value of dynamism, as Maharishi explains it. And so the young generation is feeling like, maybe shy about it, saying, my belief system is about things that are so extraordinary and fantastic and out of this world that it doesn't look real. How can I explain that? How can I stand, behind it? Some others say maybe the Ramayana is just a story, it's an epic, and it tells, things in a way that makes people understand certain values of natural law. We shouldn't take it literally. These aspects are only metaphors and examples that are just given so you understand the value of good and bad, and it's really a philosophy or a way of life, and like that, guiding people to proper behavior, to proper relation. And it's all of this at the same time. It's not that it's not. It's all of this at the same time. But overall, and above all, it is the story of natural law. And if it is the story of natural law, and we are natural law, we are the embodiment of natural law, so it's a story of what's happening within us. And that is how Maharishi inspired me to find the Ramayana in the human physiology. How does the Ramayana correspond to the human physiology? And that's what this book, Ramayana in Human Physiology, describes. You can, of course, have it and read it and look at the pictures and look at the details. In a few sessions, it is not possible to cover all of these details, but we'll go through some of them to have a taste of what it is. The main thing I felt to share with you is the significance of this, the understanding of why it's there, what it means. And then the details are many and very interesting, and you can read them, and we'll go through some examples to illustrate them. But first, let's review a little bit the story of the Ramayana. It talks about mainly a king whose name is Dasharat, who wanted to have his rulership being taken by a progeny, and he didn't have a progeny for that. He didn't have children for this, and he wanted to give this to a progeny. So he did a procedure which is called a yagya. A yagya is a procedure of natural law where he actually invoked the laws of nature in a specific way. And the people who do the yagya are the rishis. They are the ones who are the Vedic scholars, and mainly in his reality as a leader, a king. And in the Ramayana, we can also tell in the Vedic literature what is the history of the king, from where this king came, and he is a descendant of another value and natural law. We can go through these. They are very clearly explained in the book, but I don't want to throw too many names to confuse you. So this Dasharat did a yagya, a big procedure, and then he got sons. He got 4 sons. And the elder was to become the king, and the elder happens to be Ram. So Ram and Ramayana. So Ram is the incarnation of wholeness, but Ram is born, of course, as a child, as a baby, and then is going to grow and develop. And the others, the brothers, they had 3 brothers, so they are 4 in the family, and they lived together happily. And each son, they had their own mothers. There were 3 mothers, and they grew very nicely, everybody loving each other. And then Ram became adult life. He had to be trained also by a rishi, Vishvamitra and others. And you see through the program what is the training at the beginning. Who got trained how mainly to shoot the arrow with the bow, and how to balance himself and all that. And that's, reminiscent of how we have to learn how to walk and how to balance ourselves when we grow up as a basic part of training. But we'll go through the comparison later. And then he became adult and balanced, and it was time to be associated with a wife. And he found, through a very interesting way, which also has many, many aspects to it that are very fascinating, how he got his wife, who is an incarnation also of a value of natural law, which is Lakshmi, the value of nourishing power, wholeness, and all of that. And there was a big competition, and for many reasons it is explained who is going to take over the function or the reality of this association between husband and wife. And it was Ram that was able to do it through passing a test which is related to a bow, the bow of Shiva, who represents silence and infinite silence, that nobody could actually take the bow and put the arrow on it. And actually Ram, when he took the bow, it even broke it, so it was so powerful that he passed the competition, and then he married Sita. In the meantime, they were preparing for Ram to take the kingdom when he comes back and become the king after Dasharat, who was getting older and feeling to retire. But one of the mothers was worried that something might happen, and she felt she wanted her son, rather than Ram, to become the king. So she went to Dasharat and told him that he had promised her a boon, that whatever boon she wants, he will give her anytime, because she had been very faithful to him. This was the youngest of the mothers, and she had even saved his life in a battlefield. And he gave her this boon that you can get whatever you want anytime you ask me. And she told him, you told me I can get whatever I want, so I want my son to be the king rather than Ram. Her son's name was Bharat. And the king was, he says, but what did Ram do to you, and like that. And there was a whole drama happening, and she insisted. And she was moved to do that by one of her servants, and there is also a story around that. And she absolutely insisted, out of fear that she might lose something or things will not work. She lost her balance. And she insisted that it was her son that should be the king and not Ram. And so Dasharat was so sad that he actually passed away from sadness. Dasharat is the father of Ram, father of Bharat. When Ram came back, he was also, of course, very saddened from this whole story. Bharat wasn't there, and when Bharat came back, he said, I'll never accept that Ram is not the king. And besides, the mother of Bharat, who asked to change the kingdom from Ram to Bharat, had asked that Ram should be not only not become the king, but he should be exiled from the kingdom and go into the forest for 14 years. And so when Ram came, he said, fine, this was the boon, this is what was required, I will go. And Sita said, I will go with you. He said, no, you should stay, you're young, you're delicate. But she said, no, I'm with you and I will go. So Ram and Sita went into exile. And this is a time when Bharat came and the king Dasharat died and all of that. And so Bharat tried to bring him back when he was already halfway into the forest. Ram did not accept. He said, I promised that I will go, and that was something that I promised, and I had to go. And then he went into the forest. And Bharat said, I will rule only in your name. And he took the sandals of Ram and put it on the throne. And he said, I will rule in your name. They all came and apologized, but Ram didn't want. He said, this is my destiny. And in fact, we find that actually this was meant because there was a very, very disruptive person. It's called a Rakshasa in the Vedic literature, in Ramayana, which means like kind of a demon, who was actually a very evolved individual, but who couldn't get the highest level of evolution. And even he did lots of sacrifice and all of that. And he was disrupting things. Actually, ultimately, the story says that because he wanted to be approached by Ram, because Ram was the incarnation of Vishnu. And if Ram was to kill him, then he would be reaching the highest level of enlightenment and will be totally liberated. And so this is the underlying reason of why Ram and Sita went into the forest, so there is a logic to it. Besides, the times were disruptive, and the rishis who were performing the performances and doing their meditation and their yagyas were not allowed to do it properly, because there were always these disruptions by these rakshasas that were constantly bothering them. And so you see through the story and the time that Ram spent in the forest, how Ram adjusts things, puts things back into order, and does things that are needed to be done. So as if the disruption, if things aren't going perfectly, then the attention of Ram being there was resolving things and allowing things to come back to order and come back to order. And then at one point in this story, Ravana, who is that Rakshasa that we talked about, realized that Sita was there, and he found her so unbelievable that he wanted to take her, and so he actually, through a certain treachery, abducted her and took her to his kingdom. And Ram came back. It's also a very interesting story how and why he, how it happened, because Ram had gone to search something that Sita wanted, and he told his brother who was with him, Lakshman, to protect her, but then they played a trick on them. Ravana dissimulated himself as a priest, as a rishi, and he convinced Lakshman to go help Ram, because Ram was going to be in difficulty, and then asked Sita to follow him or give him something to drink or eat, and she got out of her place where she was being protected, and he then took her away and ran away with her, and then put her in his kingdom, which is very powerful kingdom, and he passed to that kingdom where nobody can easily access. And when Ram came, he was furious about it, and you see this very unexpected anguish from somebody who is such an incarnation of wholeness, but it's there, and we have to explain why it is. And at that time, he started to go towards that kingdom to retrieve Sita, who herself kept very distant from Ravana, protected there, and wouldn't let him come even close to her. And Ram then found, there is very interesting story how he found a very powerful figure in the Ramayana who is called Hanuman. Hanuman is half man, half monkey, has a tail and this, but is supernatural power, and has many monkeys, that are like that. They call them monkeys. They are the Vanaras. It's a translation, but they're considered supernatural beings that have supernatural powers. Like Hanuman could fly, could make himself small, could travel through distances, become huge. He can create fire, and with his tail he can burn the whole city. So some extraordinary things and extraordinary powers. And they had a kingdom, and they had two kings, the Vanaras, the monkey, the supernatural power monkey, and they had two kings, and their two kings have also a very interesting story, how they are, where they come from, how they react with each other, and then how they had a conflict, and how Ram solved their conflict. I'm saying this because this particular part is something I like to comment on, because it gives a real contrast of the story and its unbelievable content and meaning because things change. They go into a cave, and then there is a demon there, and one of the kings killed the demon. The demon's blood is like milk, but then it gets transformed into blood. And then his brother runs away. He thinks that it was his brother who was killed, and then he goes back. Then the brothers have a fight, and Ram has to resolve all of these things. And so I'm saying this to say that when you read the story, it looks like out of this world. It's like, what is it talking about, And you wonder, what is the teaching in that? What is the reality of that? And some people say maybe they were extraterrestrial people who came on Earth. Some other people say it's just fantasy. And some people say, oh, I don't want to deal with that. And others say only it's a metaphor, like it's kind of epic. Don't look at the details, look at the general thing. But actually, what is very interesting, that all of these unbelievable things are actually really aspects that are present in a very profound way in our human physiology, physically, in their structure and in their function. And that's the beauty of the value of what Maharishi explains, that this is actually natural law in its different values and different forms, acting and interacting and showing its functions in different ways and manifesting in different ways. And that's what the Ramayana is really about, and that's what our physiology is. And the correspondence is absolutely amazing, one-to-one correspondence between all of these events, including what happens, why the king, why there is milk in the cave, why there is a cave, where this man came from, why there is a river, what is the meaning of these different ladies that are nourishing, that are helping, these different values that are there, what is Sita, what is Ram, and why this happened, why Sita was abducted, and then how Ram, with the help of the monkeys, and created a bridge with an engineer called Neil, and how this bridge helped them to go there, and what happened, and how now Ram took over that aspect, that kingdom of Ravana, the demon, and brought Sita back. And when he brought her back, there are events also that happen and that lead to ultimately a life in a city where Ram was born. It's called Ayodhya, where actually a heavenly life was lived in a perfect way. And that really is the ultimate aspect where everything became absolutely perfect, and that's what is called Ram Raj. Ram Raj means the reign of Ram. So when Ram came back and he reigned on the whole territory, everything was perfect, and it's described how the rain came on time, how everybody had fullness, how there was peace and wholeness, and heavenly life was lived in this Ram Raj situation. So that's the story of the Ramayana. It comes to the completion of this first session. In the second session, we will take these aspects and try to make sense out of them, actually to see how they actually correspond to natural laws functioning in our own human physiology and its development.